Today, Professor Su will present his last episode entitled Political Satire or Coquetry. Let us welcome Professor Su.
The Mulberry Along the Lane, 陌上桑, is one of the best-known Yuefu poems in the history of Chinese literature. This ballad reputedly is about a woman named Luofu. Guo Maoqian's Yuefu Shiji collection of Yuefu poetry cites a tale from the Gujin Zhu, Notes on Past and Present of Cui Bao, which identifies her as a lady surnamed Qin from Handan. She was the wife of Wang Ren, who was an official of a city. Later, Wang Ren became a prefect of the household for the king of Zhao. One day, Luofu was in the field picking mulberries, and the king of Zhao saw her and became attracted to her. He tried to seduce her at a banquet. Luofu, who was a skilled zither player, composed 陌上桑 to discourage him. However, the source for the story is not testified by any other extant historical records.
Mulberry Along the Lane. The sun rises from the southeast corner, shines on our Qin clan house. The Qin clan has a pretty girl. She calls herself Luofu. Luofu delights in raising silkworms and picking mulberry leaves. She picks mulberry leaves at the southern corner of the wall. Blue silk strands form her basket ties. A cassia twig serves as its handle. On her head is a falling xinyan. On her ears are bright moon pearls. Of golden silk is her skirt. Of purple silk is her jacket. When passersby see Luofu, they put down their loads, stroking their beards. When young men see Luofu, they remove their caps and fiddle with their headcloths. Plowmen forget their plows. Hoers forget their hoes. When they return, they complain about each other. It's all because of looking at Luofu. The Grand Warden comes from the south. His 5 horses stop, pacing up and down. The Grand Warden sends forth an officer to ask from what house is this pretty girl. The Qin clan has a pretty girl. She calls herself Luofu. What is Luofu's age? Not quite 20 yet, a little more than 15. The Grand Warden asks Luofu, "Would you like to ride with me?" Luofu steps forward and answers, "How stupid is the Grand Warden? The Grand Warden has his own wife, and Luofu has her own husband. In the east, of 1,000+ horsemen, it is my husband who takes the lead. How can one recognize my husband?" On a white steed followed by a black colt, blue silk strands are tied to the horse's tail. Yellow gold halters the horse's head. On his waist is a windlass-style sword. It is worth millions of cash. At 15, he was a petty bureau clerk. At 20, he was a court grandee. At 30, he was a palace gentleman. At 40, he dominates an entire city. He is man of a pure white skin, thin sideburns and a slight beard. Elegantly and gracefully he paces in his bureau. Slowly he walks within his residence. 1,000 men sit there. All say my husband is exceptional.
First of all, from the consistent use of the pentasyllabic lines, the poem has been roughly dated to the later Han, when this meter became mature, despite the absence of internal evidence to support this view. Literary style can be deceiving and cannot serve as absolute evidence in dating a literary work. Basically, this song tells of a resourceful woman named Luofu who successfully rebuts the advances of a flirting Grand Warden. Traditionally, this poem has been interpreted as a representation of social injustice, depicting the situation of an official harassing a peasant girl. Recently, however, scholars have begun to deviate from this line of interpretation, analyzing its form, From a comparative perspective, Hans Franco has pointed out there is a type of medieval European pastoral where a shepherdess thwarts a philandering gentleman. Nevertheless, Mulberry Along the Lane has no exact European counterparts. However tempting it might be for scholars to compare similar types of literature from different cultures, such comparisons are in danger of disregarding real cultural differences. Franco also lists 3 stylistic features of the poem that, in his view, demonstrate its oral nature: formulaic language, various types of repetition, and exaggeration. Line 3 and 4 and 25 to 26 are considered to be instances of formulaic language, since they are similar to a passage in the famous Yuefu poem, 孔雀东南飞, Southeast fly the peacocks. This view probably needs to be modified because it is difficult to ascertain cases of formulaic language with extremely short length of Chinese poetry. Repetition, which is often interpreted as an aide-memoire and a device to advance the action, is prevalent and obvious in this poem. Exaggeration, lines 38 to 48, where the young woman boasts of her husband, as evidence of the poem's oral nature, is the weakest, since many kinds of poetry may contain such a device. Although these features are not sufficient to prove that this work is an orally composed poem, they do remain its stylistic characteristics and serve as evidence of its possible borrowing from the folk tradition. Overall, Franco maintains that this poem is an oral folk song elaborated by an upper-class poet for an aristocratic audience. Luofu's beautiful clothes and precious jewelry do not suggest a peasant girl, but a woman of some social status. But why, it might be asked, would such a lady collect mulberry leaves, unless the poet is presenting such a properly dressed woman in order to appeal to an aristocratic audience? In a different way, the image of wealth and luxury may also have drawn the common people as an ideal image, and is an example of the device of boastful inventiveness common in European ballads. Nonetheless, it is open to different interpretations, since there is no direct evidence to definitively categorize it. Zong-qi points out 5 major characteristics in analyzing this poem: situational thinking, ahistorical presentation, abrupt transitions, composite structure, and repetitions. The poem's composite structure is particularly important observation. In explaining the composite structure of a folk Yuefu, Cai points out that it involves the participation of several performers who each bring to the work a different point of view, a different set of oral formulas or expressions, and probably a different style of performance as well. Orally composed or not, the performative nature of this poem is clear and serves as a useful interpretive tool. Each section is like a mini drama with an awareness of an audience. Traditional interpretations of this poem, especially those from mainland China, usually viewed it as a story of a brave peasant girl resisting the advances of a lustful grand warden. This reading, which stresses class struggle and oppression, was typical of mainland scholarship before the 1990s. With the introduction of Western anthropological and literary theories, however, many scholars no longer support it. The tendency in more recent scholarship has been to consider it as a song of flirtation without serious moral issues. Cai, for example, has suggested that it is a work imitating the courtship rite. This intriguing poem continues to attract different interpretations. The theme of male flirtation is not unusual in the Chinese literary tradition. For example, 登徒子好色妇, Rhapsody on Master Deng Tu the Lecher, contains a paragraph in which a man politely presents poetry to a young lady to express his love. Qiuhu in the 烈女传, biographies of various ladies, represents another example. Qiuhu left for his official post 5 days after his wedding. 5 years later, as Qiuhu is returning home, he sees along the road a woman collecting mulberry leaves. He attempts to seduce her with gold but is refused. The woman turns out to be his wife, and when she discovers that he is her husband, in her shame at his immorality, she drowns herself in a river. There is another story in that book about collecting mulberry leaves, but without the theme of flirtation. In this story, the king of Qi decides to marry a woman with a big goiter because she is the only one who makes no attempts to attract him and concentrates only on collecting mulberry leaves. From these and similar stories, we know that collecting mulberry leaves for silkworms was an important agricultural activity in ancient China, portrayed in several literary texts and genres. The examples we find are all in one way or another related to love or the relationship between a man and a woman. Even though we have no direct evidence in this poem relevant to the courtship theory, there is little doubt that the mulberry as an image of love is deeply rooted in Chinese civilization. For example, poem number 8 in the Book of Poetry talks about a love tryst in the mulberry grounds in the springtime. The character of the Grand Warden does not appear as an oppressive figure, and that has contributed to the weakening support of the socialist theory of class struggle. The conversation between Luofu and the governor is amusing and relaxed. Luofu's summary of her husband's achievements is another example of boastful inventiveness. At Luofu's refusal, the poem stops, as do the Grand Warden's advances. Considering it a culmination of the boastful device, several scholars have suggested that, at the critical moment, Luofu invents a husband who outranks the Grand Warden. It is also possible that the poem as received is incomplete. In any case, these different interpretations are perhaps not mutually exclusive, but mutually illuminating. The original poem perhaps intended to reflect social ills, but different themes could have arisen through adaptation and performance. Some readers may still see its commentary on the social reality, despite its adaptations for performance and entertainment. Otherwise, it may simply be a poem about a clever woman who devises a sweet and inoffensive way to turn down her suitor. Due to our insufficient knowledge of its textual revisions, performative context, and the intended audience, all interpretations are tentative and subject to question.
Let's thank Professor Su for such a stimulating talk. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Let us relax and listen to a reading of the poem in Mandarin.
陌上桑，日出东南隅，照我秦氏楼。秦氏有好女，自名为罗敷。罗敷喜蚕桑，采桑城南隅。青丝为龙系，桂枝为龙钩。头上窝堕髻，耳中明月珠。香起为下裙， 子岂为上儒。行者见罗敷，下旦履髭须。少年见罗敷，脱帽着梢头。耕者忘其犁，锄者忘其锄。来归乡怒怨，但作观罗敷。使君从南来，无马力踟蹰。使君遣吏往，问此谁家书？秦氏有好女，自名为罗敷。罗敷年几何？20尚不足，15颇有余。使君谢罗敷，宁可共在否？罗敷前致辞，使君意何余？使君自有妇，罗敷自有夫。东方千余骑，夫婿居上头。何用识夫婿？白马从立居。青丝系马尾，黄金落马头。腰中辘轳箭，可值千万余。15服小吏，20朝大夫，30侍中郎，40专承居。为人洁白皙，连连颇有虚。盈盈弓府部，冉冉府中区。座中数千人，皆言夫婿书。